Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're stepping into a time machine and heading straight to ancient Rome. And if you love these historical journeys with us, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming deep dives. Ready to explore?
Oh, yeah.
We're diving into this incredible book, A Day in Old Rome.
Yes.
It's not just about emperors and battles.
Right.
This book paints a vivid picture of what daily life was really like back then.
It does. It's fascinating because it's like stepping into someone's shoes 2,000 years ago. We're talking fashion, food, homes, social customs, even how they dealt with death. Get ready for some surprises.
Okay, I am SO there. Let's start with the grand overview.
Okay.
If we could magically teleport to ancient Rome, that's the first thing that would hit us.
Imagine this. You're standing on a rooftop, overlooking the campus marshes, the heart of the city. You're surrounded by a sea of magnificent buildings, temples with gleaming roofs, marble columns reaching for the sky. It's a breathtaking spectacle of power and grandeur.
Sounds glorious. But I bet it wasn't all sunshine and togas. Didn't Romans complain about their city?
Oh, absolutely. The book actually mentions that Romans often grumbled about the noise, the crowds, and the lack of privacy. It's a good reminder that even in a seemingly glamorous era, people still had their everyday gripes. Kind of like us complaining about traffic or slow internet.
Right. So let's zoom in a bit.
Right.
How was this bustling city laid out? What would we see as we walk the streets?
Think of it as a city of islands, not in the water, but these massive apartment blocks called insulae crammed together, separated by a maze of narrow streets. And there was constant construction and demolition happening, so imagine the dust and the chaos. But amidst all this, you'd also find the luxurious homes of the wealthy, the domus, offering a stark contrast to the crowded insulae.
Speaking of the domus, I'm picturing something out of a movie. Give me the grand tour.
Okay.
What's it like inside one of these elite Roman homes?
Imagine you're entering the domus of Publius Calvus, a wealthy Roman senator. The first thing you'd encounter is the atrium, a large, open hall, the heart of the house. But here's the cool part. Right in the center of the atrium, you'd find the impluvium, a shallow pool designed to collect rainwater.
A pool indoors. That's so extra. I love it. But what's the point? Besides looking fancy.
It's more than just fancy. The impluvium brought natural light and a sense of tranquility to the home. Romans were all about incorporating nature into their living spaces, even in the middle of a bustling city.
So they were kind of like the original hipsters, embracing the whole indoor-outdoor living thing.
You could say that. And speaking of nature, beyond the atrium, you'd find the peristelium, another open courtyard. But this one surrounded by a colonnade and often featuring a lush garden. Imagine fragrant flowers, the sound of trickling fountains, a little oasis within the house.
Okay. I'm officially jealous of these ancient Romans and their fancy homes. But what about the actual living spaces? Where did they sleep?
Eat and hang out. Well, for dining and entertaining, they had the triclinium, a formal dining room where they'd recline on couches while feasting. And then you had the cubicula, smaller rooms used as bedrooms.
Reclining on couches while eating? That sounds amazing. Sign me up. But I'm guessing those luxurious homes weren't exactly cozy in the winter. Did they at least have fireplaces?
Here's a surprising fact. Roman houses didn't have central heating. They relied on braziers, these portable fire pits to warm up the rooms. Can you imagine bundling up in layers of clothing just to stay comfortable inside your own house?
Wow. Maybe those insulays weren't so bad after all. But you mentioned something about little household shrines in the peristelium earlier.
Right.
I'm curious about those. Were the Romans super religious?
Religion was woven into every aspect of Roman life, even their homes. They had these household gods, the lares and penates, who they believed protected the family and the home itself. They'd honor these gods with small shrines, often placed in the peristelium.
So they had their own personal guardian angels looking out for them. That's kind of cool. But let's talk about the ladies of the house.
Okay.
What was life like for Roman women? Were they just stuck at home all day?
That's where things get interesting. Roman women had a surprising amount of social influence, more than many people realize. While the pater familias, the male head of the household, held authority, the matrona, his wife, commanded a great deal of respect.
Hold on. Really, I always thought Roman society was super patriarchal.
It was, to a degree, but Roman women weren't confined to the domestic sphere. They managed households, raised children, even influence political decisions through their husbands and sons.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. But what about marriage? Was it all about love and romance back then?
Not quite. Marriages among the Roman elite were often arranged based on social standing and family connections. Take Tullia, Cicero's daughter, as an example. Betrothed at 10, married at 13. It was all about strategic alliances and strengthening family ties.
Wow, that's incredibly young. I can't even imagine getting married at 13. But didn't you also mention a lavish wedding in the book?
Oh, yes. The wedding of Statilia and Pollio, two wealthy Romans. It was a grand affair, showcasing all the customs and rituals surrounding marriage, the dowry, the betrothal ceremony, the significance of the ring on the third finger. It's all detailed in the book.
It sounds like a goldmine of cultural insights. But let's be real. Were Roman marriages always happy? What about divorce?
That's a crucial point. While we might think of ancient marriages as being very traditional and long-lasting, divorce was actually quite common in Roman society. And unlike today, it was relatively easy to obtain.
Really? No messy legal battles or custody disputes?
Not exactly. While there were certainly social consequences, legally speaking, divorce was relatively straightforward, however. There was definitely a double standard. While men had more freedom in their social lives, women faced stricter societal expectations.
It's a reminder that even in a seemingly advanced society like Rome, there were still significant inequalities between the genders.
Precisely. And it's important to acknowledge those complexities as we explore this fascinating period of history.
Absolutely. But before we get too deep into the societal dynamics, I can't help but wonder about their sense of style. Did Romans care about fashion?
Oh, you bet they did. Fashion was a huge deal in Roman society. Your clothing was a direct reflection of your social status, your wealth,
Oh, yeah.
even your aspirations.
Oh, spill the tea. What were some of the must-have items in a Roman's wardrobe?
Wow. The most iconic garment was
Of course.
the toga. It was this large, semicircular piece of woolen cloth draped over the body in a very specific way. Think of it as the ultimate symbol of Roman citizenship and masculinity.
And did everyone wear togas? What about women?
Women had their own distinctive garments. The stola, a long flowing dress, was a staple, often worn over a tunic. It conveyed a sense of elegance and modesty. And then there was the palla, a shawl-like garment that provided warmth and added a touch of flair.
Sounds like they're pretty fashion-forward. Was there a particular color or fabric that was all the rage?
White clothing was considered particularly prestigious, symbolizing purity and high status. But the real status symbol was purple dye. It was incredibly expensive to produce, so only the wealthiest could afford to flaunt those vibrant purple hues.
So basically, if you wanted to make a statement in ancient Rome, you'd rock a white toga with a pop of purple.
You got it. And don't forget about the accessories. Jewelry was a huge part of Roman fashion, especially for women. They adorned themselves with elaborate necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and rings, often crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones. Think bling, Roman style.
Okay, I'm getting serious style envy right now. But all this talk of fashion makes me wonder about their grooming habits. Did they have barbershops in ancient Rome?
Barbershops were a common sight. Men frequented them not just for haircuts, but for shaves and beard trims. They used tweezers, razors, and even pumice stones to keep themselves looking their best.
It sounds like a surprisingly modern concept.
Yeah.
But I've heard that beards were actually quite fashionable in Rome at some point. What's the story there?
For centuries, Roman men were clean-shaven. But then Emperor Hadrian came along, and he decided to grow a beard, supposedly to cover up some scars. And just like that, beards became the hottest trend in Rome. Men all over the city started sporting them, wanting to emulate their emperor.
It's amazing how much influence one person, especially an emperor, could have on fashion trends. But let's shift gears from fashion to food. We touched on those lavish Roman dinner parties earlier, but I'm dying to hear all the juicy details.
Get ready for a feast. Roman dinner parties were legendary for their extravagance and elaborate etiquette. Guests wouldn't just sit at a table, they'd recline on couches, arranged around a low table called a triclinium.
Reclining on couches. That sounds way more comfortable than our modern dinner parties.
Yeah.
What else made these gatherings so special?
Everything was meticulously planned, from the seating arrangements to the multiple courses of delicacies. And it wasn't just about enjoying the food, it was a social chess game, with seating reflecting social hierarchy and a special slave, the nomenclator, announcing each guest's name and status as they arrived.
Down there. It was like a who's who of Roman society, with a side of roasted boar.
Exactly. And speaking of food, they loved their bread, All different kinds. And of course, wine flowed freely. They had various vintages imported from all over the empire, and they'd mix it with water or honey to create different flavors.
It sounds like a true culinary adventure. But aside from eating and drinking, were there any other forms of entertainment at these parties? Did they have dancing or music?
This might surprise you, but evening entertainment in ancient Rome was pretty much limited to dining and conversation. There were no theaters or concerts to attend in the evening. These dinner parties were these social events, a chance to socialize, network, and solidify relationships.
It makes you realize how different their social lives were, even for the wealthy. But speaking of social structures, we haven't talked much about slaves yet.
Right.
What was their role in Roman society, especially in these grand domus we've been exploring?
Unfortunately, slavery was a deeply ingrained part of Roman life. Slaves were everywhere, performing all sorts of tasks, from domestic service to skilled labor. The book even describes a visit to a slave market, and it's a sobering reminder of the dehumanizing nature of that trade.
It's a tough subject to think about, but were all slaves treated the same way?
No, not at all. The treatment of slaves varied greatly, depending on their master and their specific role. Some slaves were treated relatively well, even earning and saving money through a system called peculium. Others, sadly, endured horrific abuse.
So there was a hierarchy even within the slave population. That's pretty complex. And what about those who were freed? What happened to them?
Slaves could gain their freedom through manumission, either as a reward or through purchase. These freedmen, as they were called, were no longer slaves, but still faced social and legal limitations. It wasn't a simple transition, even with their newfound freedom.
It's a reminder that the legacy of slavery had long-lasting effects, even for those who escaped its chains.
Exactly, and it's an important part of Roman history that we need to acknowledge and understand.
Absolutely. But let's shift our focus from the confines of the domus back to the city itself. What about those bustling public spaces that truly capture the pulse of Roman life?
You're talking about the Fora, the heart of Rome. These were grand public squares filled with temples, basilicas, monuments, and they were constantly buzzing with activity, politics, commerce, and social life all converged in these vibrant spaces.
Okay, paint a picture for me. What would it be like to stroll through the Fora?
Imagine a mix of people from all walks of life. Senators in their flowing togas, wealthy merchants striking deals, ordinary citizens going about their daily routines, and of course the ever-present slaves carrying messages or accompanying their masters. It was a sensory overload, a melting pot of Roman society.
Sounds like a chaotic yet fascinating place. Were there different types of Fora, or was it just one big public square?
There were actually several Fora, each with its own distinct character and function. You had the Forum Romanum, the oldest and most historically significant, the Forum of Caesar, the Forum of Augustus, and the Forum of Trajan, just to name a few.
Wow, so like a network of interconnected public spaces, each with its own vibe.
Exactly. And one of the most fascinating features of the Fora was the Acta Diurna, a public bulletin board system that was essentially the precursor to newspapers.
Hold on. They had something like newspapers in ancient Rome. That's incredible.
Not newspapers as we know them today. But the Acta Diurna served a similar purpose. They'd post important announcements, legal notices, upcoming events, and even a bit of gossip.
So it was like a mix of government announcements, community news, and TMZ, all rolled into one. That's amazing. What kind of information would you find on the Acta Diurna?
They'd list things like the price of grain, announcements about gladiatorial games, legal proceedings, even details about the emperor's activities. It was a way for Romans to stay informed about what was happening in their city and beyond.
I'm starting to see why people complained about the noise and crowds. But speaking of the emperor, I'm curious about the seat of power in Rome. We've explored the homes of the wealthy, but what about the imperial palace itself?
The imperial palace, located on the Palatine Hill, was a world unto itself. It was a sprawling complex, not just a single building. Think government offices, barracks for the Praetorian Guard, temples and shrines, all alongside the emperor's private residence.
So it wasn't just a home. It was like a mini city within a city.
Exactly. And it projected an image of power and authority. Imagine walking through a labyrinth of grand halls, adorned with intricate mosaics, towering marble columns, and priceless works of art. Every detail meticulously crafted to showcase the might of the Roman Empire.
Sounds pretty intimidating. But what about the emperor himself? What was a typical day like for the most powerful man in Rome?
The emperor's day was a mix of official duties, religious ceremonies, and even some leisure activities. He would receive visitors, consult with advisors, attend Senate sessions, offer sacrifices to the gods, and enjoy lavish banquets and entertainment.
Talk about a busy schedule. But you mentioned earlier that the emperor had a circle of close friends and advisors. The emisi, what role did they play?
The emisi were more than just friends. They were a select group of advisors, confidants, and companions who held a privileged position within the imperial court. They often came from the Senate or the equestrian class, and their influence could be immense.
So it was a mix of genuine friendship and political strategy.
Exactly. Being close to the emperor meant power and influence, but it could also be a precarious position.
Okay. That's super interesting. I'm starting to get a sense of the power dynamics at play in ancient Rome,
Yeah.
but we're only scratching the surface.
Oh, absolutely. We haven't even touched on the Roman army, their entertainment, their religious beliefs, and so much more. Get ready for a deep dive into the fascinating and often surprising world of ancient Rome. And speaking of power dynamics, let's not forget about those who kept the city running smoothly, the ones who ensured the safety and order of Rome's citizens, the vigils.
The vigils, is that like the Roman version of a police force?
You got it. They were responsible for everything from firefighting to crime prevention and even traffic control. Imagine a bustling city like Rome with its narrow streets and constant activity. The vigils had their work cut out for them.
I can only imagine. What was a typical day like for vigils officer? Were they patrolling the streets, chasing down criminals?
Think of them as multitaskers. They'd patrol the streets at night, keeping an eye out for fires and suspicious activity. They'd apprehend criminals, direct traffic, and even enforce public order. They were the guardians of the city, making sure things ran smoothly.
So they were like firefighters, police officers, and traffic cops all rolled into one. That's impressive. Did they have any special equipment or tools to help them with their duties?
They carried swords and clubs, but their most important tool was actually water. They were nicknamed the bucket men because they used buckets and pumps to extinguish fires. It makes sense when you think about how many wooden structures there were in ancient Rome. Fire was a constant threat.
Bucket men. I love it. It's amazing how they managed to keep such a bustling city safe and orderly with seemingly simple tools. But let's shift gears from the city's protectors to the force that made Rome a superpower, the Roman army.
Ah, the Roman army. A force to be reckoned with. Their disciplined organization and military prowess were legendary, allowing them to conquer vast territories and shape the course of history.
What made them so effective? Was it their training, their weapons, their leadership?
It was a combination of factors. Their training was grueling, designed to transform ordinary men into ardent soldiers. Imagine long marches, intense drills, and rigorous combat training. They were prepared for anything. They had standardized equipment, including the gladius, a short sword perfect for close combat, the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to disrupt enemy formations, and of course their iconic shields and armor.
So they were well-equipped and highly trained, but there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Absolutely. What truly set them apart was their loyalty and devotion to Rome. Roman soldiers were instilled with a deep sense of patriotism and duty. They fought not just for personal glory, but for the greater good of their empire and their fellow citizens. This shared sense of purpose, this belief in something bigger than themselves, is what made them such a formidable force.
So they weren't just fighting for a paycheck, they were fighting for an ideal for a way of life. That's powerful. But what about the individuals who made up this legendary army? Were they all from wealthy families, or could anyone join the ranks?
The Roman army was surprisingly diverse. While some soldiers came from privileged backgrounds, many were ordinary men from all walks of life seeking adventure opportunity or simply a steady income. The book actually tells the story of Quadratus, a Roman soldier who rose through the ranks to become a high-ranking officer.
Quadratus. That's an interesting name. Tell me more about his story. How did he go from a simple soldier to a leader in the army?
Quadratus started his service as a legionary, the backbone of the Roman army. He was assigned to a legion and stationed far from home, facing the harsh realities of military lifelong marches, difficult conditions, and the constant threat of battle. But it was in these challenging circumstances that he honed his skills, proved his courage, and earned the respect of his comrades.
It sounds like a true test of character. So how did he climb the ranks? Was it all about bravery in battle, or was there more to it than that?
It was a combination of factors. Quadratus distinguished himself in battle, showing bravery and tactical skill. But he was also a disciplined soldier, a loyal comrade, and a natural leader. He earned the trust of his superiors and the admiration of those who served under him.
So it wasn't just about being a fearless warrior. It was about leadership loyalty, and the ability to inspire others. And what was Quadratus's ultimate fate? Did he die a hero's death on the battlefield?
Actually, Quadratus' story has a happier ending. He eventually reached the rank of primus pilus, the highest-ranking centurion in a legion. He retired with honor and respect, a testament to his dedication, skill, and unwavering loyalty to Rome.
That's inspiring. It shows that even in a hierarchical society like Rome, hard work, talent, and a bit of luck could take you far. But enough about the military for now. Let's explore the lighter side of Roman life, their entertainment. We've talked about chariot races and gladiatorial combats, but I'm curious about other forms of amusement they enjoyed.
Well, while those grand spectacles were certainly popular, Romans also enjoyed a variety of other diversions. They had theaters with comedies, tragedies, and even these vaudeville-like performances called mimes that often poked fun at current events and social customs.
So like ancient Roman stand-up comedy. Were these performances open to everyone or just the wealthy elite?
For the most part, theater was open to all, although seating arrangements often reflected social hierarchy. Imagine sitting in a crowded theater surrounded by people from all walks of life, laughing, crying, and being entertained together. It was a shared cultural experience.
That's really cool. I love how the theater brought people together regardless of their social standing. You also mentioned something about public baths. What was the big deal with those? Is it just about getting clean?
Public baths, or thermae, were far more than just a place to wash up. They were like ancient Roman spas and social clubs rolled into one. They had hot and cold pools, steam rooms, massage rooms, even libraries and gardens.
Wait, libraries and a bathhouse. That's a combination I never would have thought of.
Romans were all about combining leisure and intellectual pursuits. They saw the baths as a place to relax, socialize, exercise, and even engage in intellectual discussions.
So it was like a one-stop shop for physical and mental well-being. Starting to think these Romans were onto something. But did everyone have access to these luxurious baths, or was it just for the wealthy?
While there were certainly more luxurious baths catering to the elite, public baths were generally accessible to people from all social classes. It was a place where senators and laborers could mingle, relax, and enjoy the amenities.
That's fascinating. It seems like the baths were a great equalizer in Roman society, a place where social barriers were temporarily blurred. But we can't forget about those board games you mentioned earlier. What kind of games were the Romans playing in their downtime?
Romans loved their board games. They had strategy games like legerdemain, which was kind of like chess requiring careful planning and tactical thinking. And of course, they had dice games often played for money or other stakes, testing their luck and their gambling skills.
So they had games for the strategists and games for the risk-takers. It sounds like they had a pretty well-rounded approach to entertainment. But did they ever venture outside the city walls for some fun and fresh air?
Absolutely. Wealthy Romans often owned lavish villas in the countryside, offering a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of city life. These villas weren't just simple country homes. They were sprawling estates with vineyards, olive groves, beautifully manicured gardens, and all the amenities you could imagine.
Okay, now I'm picturing a Roman version of lifestyles of the rich and famous. Give me all the luxurious details. What would a typical day at a Roman villa look like?
Imagine leisurely walks in the gardens, followed by a refreshing dip in a private pool. They'd entertain guests with extravagant banquets read in their libraries, and some even had their own private hippodromes for chariot racing.
Private hippodromes. Talk about taking entertainment to the next level.
Huh.
But did they ever truly escape the demands of city life? Or were they still dealing with business and politics even in their rural retreats?
Well, even in their idyllic countryside estates, wealthy Romans still managed their affairs, corresponded with colleagues, and kept up with political developments back in Rome. It wasn't a complete disconnect, but it did offer a change of pace, a chance to reconnect with nature and enjoy a more relaxed lifestyle.
It's a fascinating contrast to the frenetic energy of the city. But let's not forget that Roman life wasn't all togas and triumphs. There are also some aspects that might seem strange or even shocking to us today. We've touched on the brutality of their public games, but what other customs or practices might raise eyebrows in the 21st century?
One that might surprise you is their dining etiquette. Remember how we talked about them reclining on couches while eating? Well, they also ate with their fingers. Forks weren't really a thing back then.
No forks. That's hard to imagine. Did they at least have napkins? I can only imagine the mess.
They were actually quite meticulous about cleanliness, washing their hands before and after meals. But yeah, no forks. And another interesting tidbit, kissing was a common form of greeting, even among casual acquaintances.
So you might find yourself kissing someone you barely knew. That's a bit different from our handshake culture. But aside from those social customs, the book also hints at some darker practices, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Roman society, like many ancient civilizations, had its share of practices that we would consider unacceptable today. Infanticide, for instance, was tragically not uncommon, particularly among those who couldn't afford to raise another child. It's a stark reminder of the harsh realities of life for many back then.
It's difficult to grapple with those aspects of their history, even while appreciating their achievements. But I think it's important to see the full picture, the good and the bad.
Absolutely. It's about understanding them in their historical context, acknowledging both the progress they made and the challenges they face.
Well said. And I think this book does a fantastic job of presenting that nuanced view of Roman life, showcasing both the beauty and the complexity of their civilization.
It's been a fascinating journey so far.
I'm ready for more. What other aspects of Roman life are waiting to be explored?
Let's shift our focus to a different aspect of Roman life, one that might surprise you: their love for books and libraries.
Wait, really? I always picture Romans as being all about gladiators and military conquests. Were they really bookworms?
More than you might think. Books were actually quite common in ancient Rome. They had a thriving book trade with skilled scribes copying and distributing texts on all sorts of subjects.
So what were they reading? Were they all Stoic philosophers poring over dusty scrolls?
While philosophy and history were certainly popular, Romans had diverse tastes. They enjoyed poetry, drama, satire, even travelogues. Imagine curling up with a scroll about exotic lands and faraway cultures. Sounds pretty appealing, right?
Definitely more relaxing than watching a gladiatorial combat. But I'm curious about the actual books themselves. Were they like the books we have today?
Not exactly. They used papyrus rolls made from reeds, which were carefully stored in cylindrical cases. Imagine a library filled with these scrolls, all neatly labeled and organized. It must have been an impressive sight.
But weren't papyrus rolls fragile and difficult to handle? I can imagine them crumbling in your hands.
They were delicate, but surprisingly durable. The book mentions how they were often reinforced with cedar oil and carefully rolled to prevent damage. It's amazing how some of these ancient scrolls have survived for centuries, giving us a glimpse into the minds of Romans who lived thousands of years ago.
Talk about a connection to the past. But did they have public libraries where anyone could access these scrolls? Or were books only for the wealthy and educated?
Rome had several impressive public libraries filled with thousands of scrolls on all sorts of subjects. These libraries were open to the public, promoting learning and cultural enrichment for everyone.
So even ordinary citizens had access to knowledge and literature. That's pretty progressive for ancient times.
Absolutely. They recognized the importance of education and the dissemination of knowledge. And of course, wealthy Romans often had extensive private libraries in their homes, showcasing their literary taste and intellectual pursuits.
So a private library was kind of like a status symbol back then.
You could say that. It was a way to demonstrate your wealth, your education, and your sophistication.
I can see it now. A Roman senator showing off his impressive collection of scrolls, just like someone today might brag about their first edition books.
Exactly. But let's move on from the world of books and delve into the economic realities of Roman life. We've talked about those lavish lifestyles of the wealthy, but what about the average Roman? How did they make a living?
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Not everyone could afford a luxurious domus or a private hippodrome. What were some of the common jobs back then?
Roman society had a wide range of occupations. You had farmers and artisans, merchants and shopkeepers, soldiers and sailors. Construction was a booming industry, with thousands of workers building and maintaining Rome's impressive infrastructure.
I can only imagine the noise and dust from all that construction. But the book also mentions banks, shops, and inns. What role did they play in the Roman economy?
Banks were essential for facilitating trade and commerce. They provided loans, exchanged currencies, and even acted as safe deposit boxes. Shops were the heart of daily life, where people bought and sold goods. And inns provided lodging for travelers, essential in a city that attracted people from all over the empire.
So it sounds like they had a pretty sophisticated economic system in place. Were there any regulations or oversight, or was it a free-for-all?
The Roman government did regulate certain aspects of the economy. They set standards for weights and measures, controlled the grain supply, and intervened in cases of fraud or price gouging. They understood the importance of a stable and fair marketplace.
So they had some form of consumer protection even back then.
Exactly. They recognized that a healthy economy depended on trust and fairness. But let's not forget about the elephant in the room, the issue of slavery.
Right, we've talked about the social implications of slavery, but what about its economic impact? How did it shape Roman society?
Slavery was unfortunately a major economic engine in Roman society. Slaves provided a cheap and plentiful source of labor, performing a wide range of tasks, from agricultural work to skilled crafts.
So their economy was heavily reliant on slave labor.
Sadly, yes.
Hmm.
And this reliance had complex consequences. On the one hand, slave labor fueled their economic prosperity, allowing them to produce goods and services more cheaply. But it also stifled innovation and created a class of people denied basic rights.
It's a tragic paradox, their economic success built on the backs of those who were exploited and dehumanized.
Exactly. It's a dark chapter in their history, one that we must acknowledge and learn from. But let's shift gears again from the harsh realities of economics to the awe-inspiring world of Roman architecture and engineering. We've touched on the impressive scale of their buildings, but what made their architectural style so unique?
I'm ready for some architectural inspiration. What were the key elements that made Roman buildings stand out?
Think grandeur, practicality, and innovation. They were masters of concrete, a revolutionary material for its time, allowing them to create massive structures that have endured for centuries. The Colosseum, the Pantheon, the aqueducts, these are testaments to their architectural genius.
Concrete. That seems so basic. I wouldn't have guessed that was their secret weapon.
It might seem simple, but the Romans were pioneers in the development and use of concrete. They perfected the recipe, experimenting with different mixtures and techniques. This allowed them to create strong, durable structures on a scale never seen before.
So concrete was the foundation of their architectural achievements. What about those arches and vaults that the book mentions? Were those just decorative elements?
Far from it. Arches and vaults were key structural elements, allowing them to build large open spaces without massive columns. They used these techniques to construct bridges, aqueducts, and those magnificent vaulted ceilings like the one in the Pantheon.
It sounds like they were constantly pushing the boundaries of engineering, always innovating and finding new ways to create something spectacular.
That's exactly right. They were problem solvers and innovators, always seeking new ways to improve and expand their architectural capabilities. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. Their architecture was also incredibly practical. Every building served a specific purpose, whether it was a temple for worship, a bathhouse for hygiene and relaxation, or an amphitheater for entertainment.
So they were form meets function masters.
Yeah.
They knew how to create buildings that were both beautiful and useful.
Precisely. And let's not forget about those aqueducts engineering marvels that brought fresh water into the city from miles away.
Okay, I've always been fascinated by those aqueducts. Tell me more about how they worked.
Imagine a series of arches stretching for miles across the countryside, carrying a channel of fresh water high above the ground. They used gravity to transport water over long distances, a testament to their understanding of physics and engineering.
That's incredible. They managed to create a complex and efficient water system without modern technology. It makes you appreciate the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Romans.
It's truly remarkable. And those aqueducts weren't just functional, they were also visually stunning, adding to the grandeur of the Roman landscape.
This deep dive into Roman architecture and engineering has been eye-opening. It's amazing to see how they combined artistic vision with practical solutions. But as we wrap up our journey through ancient Rome, I can't help but think about their enduring legacy. What can we learn from the Romans? How did their culture and achievements shape the world we live in today?
The Romans left an indelible mark on Western civilization. Their influence can be seen in our laws, our government, our language, our art, our architecture, and even our values.
It's incredible to think about how much we owe to a civilization that existed thousands of years ago.
Their emphasis on practicality, order, and efficiency still resonates today, and their achievements in law, engineering, and architecture continue to inspire us.
They certainly set a high bar for future civilizations, but it's important to remember that they weren't perfect. They had their flaws and made their share of mistakes. But their story reminds us that civilizations are complex and dynamic, capable of both great achievements and profound missteps.
Exactly. Studying history isn't about idolizing the past. It's about understanding it, learning from it, and using those insights to shape a better future.
Well said. This deep dive into a day in old Rome has been an incredible journey. We've walked the streets of ancient Rome, explored their homes, witnessed their triumphs and their tragedies, and gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of their civilization.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating book with you.
And to all our listeners, if you're as intrigued by ancient Rome as we are, I encourage you to pick up a copy of A Day in Old Rome. It's a captivating read that will transport you back in time and leave you with a newfound understanding of this remarkable civilization. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into ancient Rome. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of history, culture, and the human experience.
Until then, keep exploring and keep learning.